you're focused on with this attestations is there are alternative ways to identify who should have governance powers over a system that has not to do with the capital of the system, and it instead is other things. And like you said, the Optimism's Citizen House is a portion of the governance over the Optimism ecosystem that is explicitly not the capital, not the token, but is instead based off of the merits, perhaps. And so could you also illustrate just like, if it's not capital, what else is it? Is it turned into a meritocracy, or what are the other alternatives that are unlocked if we are not having a capital governance system?
Yeah, I mean, first I should also add that like governance here is kind of just the first motivating app, right? Like I do think that there's a lot of other apps as well, and the Soulbound paper with Pooja and Glenn, we talk about like loans, potentially kind of clubs and memberships and like all of these use cases, but governance is just one where there's already this kind of big existing demand. So just a couple of fairly simple examples. I mean, one is just proof of humanity, right? So, you could do some quadratic thing where if you have n tokens, then instead of n units of governance power, you have square root of n units of governance power. And so like that still is a little bit token based, and so you get the benefit of being able to distinguish between someone who cares about optimism versus someone who doesn't care about optimism. But at the same time, the square root function kind of drops off after a while, and so you don't have kind of full on plutocracy, right? So that's just one simple example. Another example is that one of the things that I think we could do a lot more with is airdrops, where the airdropping is done in a more intelligent way, right? So the airdrops that we have today, like a lot of them, they get VC farmed. Even if they don't get VC farmed, a lot of people claim them and then just sell them immediately. The thing that would be more interesting to see is like airdrops that try to actually filter for people who like actually care about a project, who actually really participated in it, and maybe even people who like learned more about the project or even kind of participated in that project in some micro way, right? And if you wants to do that, then like, or if we wanted to be like remotely easy for people to do that sort of thing, then like being able to formally represent, this person did this thing, this person kind of used this project for this amount of time, participated in this event, and that sort of thing would actually make it much easier to do that sort of stuff, right? And that way, we can have airdrops to like actually target both, people who would actually hold the coin instead of just selling it immediately, and like actually continue to be productive, contributors to that project's community.
Yeah, so Evan, feel free to build on what Vitalik was saying here, but we all know in the crypto world, the state of crypto is not yet what we want it to be in the future. So there's a lot many things to unlock in order to get to that future. So attestations and credentials being one of those things. What can we unlock, and what is left to unlock in DeFi, crypto, and all of these systems that we're building when we have like a robust identity system that Vitalik is referencing?
So right now, without a robust reputation system, a robust identity system, the only thing that I know about you and I know your Ethereum address is how much money you have and what kinds of financial transactions you've been participating in, what kinds of assets you've purchased or been gifted, stolen, been airdropped. And so we can't coordinate, as Vitalik was noting, very interesting coordination games. It's fairly plutocratic when we're based on token holdings alone. And so being able to describe the qualitative traits that we have as individuals, our non-financial contributions to our communities, things like our achievements, our capabilities, our friendships, relationships, our memberships in secret societies, all of these traits describe us as humans and deserve the ability to interact with our smart contracts, as well as being prepared to interact with folks from any ecosystem, not just Ethereum. And so the externalities that we can start to enjoy if we take hold of off-chain data for these purposes, so that we can maintain our privacy, our autonomy, our integrity without having to experience data leakage around what happens when someone sends you a token. So, the macro externality of sending a token on a blockchain from one party to another is, basically it's that Satoshi did it once and set forth the world we know as Web3, which is how we got to now. which is a very exciting moment, for us. As far as I understand from this conversation so far, Vitalik and I agree that identity is an essential primitive for Web3. And our community, as we have discussed, is paying attention to identity in a way that they haven't before, whether through trauma or through faith. So we have an opportunity to answer the big questions working together. How do we direct our YOLO energy in a sustainable and regen way? How can we put consent above contracts and people over protocols to align on our common values and define our identity architecture for Web3? The public conversation that we're in right now has jumped into solutions, and it's the first time that a lot of crypto Twitter is talking about identity, which is super awesome. But we have this moment to amplify our shared energy into a very intentional direction. Vitalik, you've provided a wonderful conjecture that can help us come together as a community to optimize for our shared experience as people. We have an opportunity to make these trade-offs that we have to make between consent and availability with a shared allegiance to the human beings that we serve. As Chelsea Manning told me recently, data scientists are ethicists. And so we have this opportunity to depoliticize our data structures together, which is why I'm so excited that we're here today.
Evan, I think you see a fork in the road with how we can do identity, and like one ends up in a better world and one ends up in a worse world. And so like there's a famous tweet that you and I talked about from our friend Cooper Turley, where he said NFTs are the truest form of our identity or our personality or something like that. And so can you illustrate this fork in the road that you see with regards to like NFTs as identity or on-chain data as identity versus off-chain identity?
For sure. And so to engage Coop's tweet, right? Cooper's vibes have launched 1,000 communities, and his Web3 wallets, like his wardrobe, are a fairly thoughtful reflection of his taste and his preferences, his purchases. NFTs are an authentic reflection of someone's interest and ability to obtain public digital items. So Cooper is not a music NFT as much as he would like to be. He is obviously too tall for that. Cooper is not a pair of designer sneakers. Cooper's collection of objects, both digital and physical, reflect his taste, which is part of his identity, but is not the whole thing. Right? Cooper's identity is also being an alum of the University of Denver, a resident of Los Angeles, a co-founder of FireEye's DAO, a Chad of Chad Team 6, an Millennium superfan, a decent slackliner, a connoisseur of acai bowls, and fandom, employment, academic achievements, personal achievements are all really beautiful use cases for verifiable credentials. Cooper is also the life of the party for those who know him, and a tornado of memories, emotions, laughter, bull markets, bear markets, late nights, old friends, and very intense eye contact. He is a human being, a soul.
You know a lot about Cooper.
I know, right? He's a human being. He's a soul and identity that can reflect so much more than what's inside of his wallet, what his financial resources are. And he cannot be contained in a singular address. His community influence, ripples through the metaverse beyond the Ethereum ecosystem. And that's why Coop needs a data backpack, a decentralized identifier with a rich set of verifiable credentials or off-chain private data that he can choose to share when he wants, so that he can carry his multifaceted identity in a form that can be understood by his friends who use email or Bitcoin, Solana, EVM, and even websites, because his squad contains multitudes. So, if Coop is the sum of his experiences, ideas, and relationships, some are going to be more persistent than others over time, because he's a changing and evolving organic being. So he needs personal data that's going to be similarly flexible. But in some sense, Cooper is right? In Web3, where we primarily express ourselves today, publicly and on-chain, NFTs do have the most personality of any readily available token. So I'm really excited to build upon these wallets full of financial data and give us all a new accessory. Privacy-preserving, self-owned data backpacks, so we can carry around the rest of our non-financial data that makes us us. And so Cooper can join the party anywhere, no matter what protocol sits underneath.
Right. So Evan was illuminating the world of what happens when you have parts of your identity that really can't be expressed by an on-chain NFT. But Vitalik, I want to turn the question to you is, what utility do we have by having some bit of data embedded into an NFT and also not being able to transfer that NFT? So what is the point of putting something on the blockchain if that thing cannot be transferred to another address? So like, what does that non-transferability unlock, and how does that help with this whole like credential, Web3 credentialism?
Sure. And so I think there's two ways to answer that question, right? One is like, why could a on-chain non-transferable thing be better than an on-chain transferable thing? And the second is, why could an on-chain non-transferable thing be better than an off-chain non-transferable thing? And so I think to answer the first question, like basically, if you have on-chain transferable things, right, then on-chain transferable things are going to like basically just get transferred to the highest bidder, right? So the word soulbound that I used in my blog post and in that paper, right, it comes from World of Warcraft, where there was this type of item in the game called a soulbound item, where basically once you pick it up, you can't transfer it to another player, you can't trade it, you can't auction it, right? And I've always thought that that's a very good mechanism because if that mechanism did not exist, then like basically everything would just be sold. And so if you wanted to like get all of the best stuff, all you would just have to do is like, go off into the forest and kill boars for like 6 months in a row without ever going to sleep. And you just be able to get all of the same stuff anyone else has without actually doing anything challenging, right? Imagine if like you could contact the guy who is on Wikipedia as being the most successful mountain climber in the world, and ask him like, hey, if I give you $100,000, can I just like replace your name with mine and everyone will recognize me as that, right? Like basically once those kinds of things become possible, then the whole concept just kind of starts to lose meaning. So that's kind of why I think like credentials have to be non-transferable if we want credentials to kind of actually represent properties of a person. And then also I think there is this kind of anti-plutocratic governance argument, right? Of like, you also want to prevent like one hedge fund from just, gathering up thousands of these things and just, making these really huge kind of votes with one click. Like the sort of stuff that even happens in social media today all the time. That's just reminds me, I think there was this one moment a few years ago where I think it might have been Rick Falkfinger or someone else, like he just made this tweet pointing out that like, hey, Twitter is like actually totally vulnerable to like basically commercial attacks. And then a few minutes later it got 5,000 likes. That was, I thought of fun. Like, that sort of stuff happens, right? And like, we want to make it harder for that stuff to happen. So that's the first question. The second question for why chains are useful. So I think there is a couple of different places where chains are useful. So the first place where chains can be useful, I think, is account management, right? And the problem that I think, you might call key revocation, key recovery, like just generally like making like cryptographic keys not count anymore, in case you want to replace them or you're worried that one of them got lost or stolen. So the basic problem is that like if you don't have something that can hold some kind of state, then if I have a key and I tell people, hey, here's my public key, if I sign things with this key, then they come from me, then I have no way to kind of repudiate that. Like I can't go and say, well, no, that's not me anymore, because, well, what happens if I do send a message to repudiate, but then 5 years later, someone manages to hack that key, and then they go out to the internet and they say, oh, no, that repudiation message, that was a hacker. I'm still the real Vitalik. So what blockchains do is they do kind of keep track of time, right? And I've, as I'm sure you remember many times, I've talked many times about social recovery wallets, and in the Soulbound paper, we also talk about community recovery, and so like having on-chain accounts that can actually have smart contracts, have the functionality for doing key changes, doing key recoveries, and those kinds of things. Like you need some infrastructure to do that sort of thing to have a good identity layer, right? So that's the first point. And then the other one is the other really big one is negative reputation, right? So I think the simplest kind of tame use case for negative reputation that I think is pretty compelling is if you want to take out loans, right? Like if you want to take out a loan, then one thing you might want to be able to do is prove that you haven't taken out any other loans, or prove that you haven't taken out more than a certain number of other loans, right? Because if you don't have that and you just say, hey, look, I'm reputable enough to take out $100,000, and then you go and just do that with 20,000 lenders in parallel, then you could just run off with $200 million. But if on the other hand, taking out a loan gives you a negative reputation token, well, I mean, I shouldn't say negative, right? Because taking out a loan isn't bad, but it's like a reputation token that you can't hide even if you wanted to. Then that actually empowers you because it lets you prove the absence of those tokens or prove that you have less than a certain number of those tokens in order to show that like you haven't actually taken out many loans yet, and so it's still okay to give you another one. So, and I think. If we want to like really unlock kind of the full potential of these things for the economy, social media, better forms of communication, then there are going to be places where negative reputation has to apply. And there again, like you have to prove a negative, right? And cryptography can't prove a negative. Blockchains can prove a negative. Blockchains are definitely not the only thing that can prove a negative, but they are one thing.
Evan, what about whatever Vitalik just said piqued your interest? Anything that came to mind there?
Yeah, I think, it's a very interesting thing for us to discuss these negative or unintended externalities that come from sending a token from one party to another. So, Vitalik, you've mentioned some of the critical needs that we have in an identity system: the ability to rotate keys, the ability to issue non-transferable traits, the ability to have resolvable public key infrastructure so we can tell whose keys are who. And it's so wonderful that you've highlighted these things because these are things that decentralized identifiers and verifiable credentials can already do today. Let's talk about token externalities. So, all right. So if Vitalik sends a token to my wallet, he's saying something about me that is public to everyone on Earth and in space forever. If he sends me ETH, which I hope he does, he's making a financial statement. But if he sends me a soulbound token saying Evan's a total Chad, he's saying something much more directed and specific about me. So if this token has some data about me in clear text, then we have the externality that apps and people will be able to read it and access it easily forever. So everyone can see that Vitalik has made a statement about me if we assume that everyone knows whose keys are whose. So we know that the issuer, Vitalik, has said something about me, Evan, the subject. So now all of ETH knows that Vitalik and I are talking. So we've started some really fun rumors. But if that token has encrypted data, David can know that Vitalik has said something about me, but not exactly what he said.